Hello, my dear friends. How are you? I do hope I find you all in good health and safe and sound. Welcome. Thank you for joining me here today. I'm Ari Thuriger, and I'll be having a quick view on the pagan festivity of Imbolc, which is at hand, and I don't think I ever spoke of it before, at least not in this channel. I've seen that there's quite a lot of information on this and other pagan festivities, but from a modern perspective more often than not, especially from a modern Wiccan perspective and other New Age religious movements, which doesn't quite focus on the essence of this festivity. And there's always the tendency to create a lot of speculations, but affirm them as historically correct facts. So I would like to go straight to the point concerning this festivity and demystify some points here and there as much as possible. Just before we start, I would also like to give what seems an unpopular opinion because it's bothering me a little, just a little bit, and I want to know your opinion on it as well. Worry not, I'll put the time markers or whatever so you can jump to the subject if you don't want to listen to this part. Well then, I don't go to the cinema that often, but I went to see Lord of the Rings: War of the Rohirrim because I'm a huge fan of Tolkien's works of literature. It's a work more on an anime style, right? Which I have nothing against. I confess that I don't have a vast knowledge on anime works, but I don't dislike them, and I think it is a very interesting artistic expression, and without a doubt, it is an extraordinary and vast media. However, I was disappointed with this movie. For me, the high points of the movie were at the very beginning, the use of the original orchestra of Peter Jackson's original trilogy, and the use of Sir Christopher Lee's voice for the character of Saruman. Everything else, I found it extremely predictable, quite the cliche, honestly. The voice acting is good, but the script, the storyline, and such is just too insipid, rather dull, if you take my meaning. And the animation itself was weird. It was not visually appealing. It felt like an attempt to bring The Lord of the Rings into the anime world to be more appealing to that audience, but with this seemingly aversion to the style, so it seems forced for the sake of expanding Tolkien's work into a different media, but at the same time trying to hold on to a traditional Western animation style, but staying in between, which isn't good in this case, because it's neither one thing nor the other, but a mess. So, I see quite a lot of people that actually preferred War of the Rohirrim rather than the Rings of Power, going as far as to state that it's way better than Rings of Power. And in my opinion, if this is indeed the main opinion of the majority, I think people are more inclined to follow the trendy opinion rather than having an opinion of their own. And there's truly a lack of critical thinking and truly a lack of taking into consideration one's own opinions and likes and dislikes and lack of formulation of solid arguments and preference on adopting popular trifle opinions. And this worries me because it shows that the masses are too comfortable in just following vague ideas of some subject they do not delve into and as such know nothing about, and yet hold it as unshakable truth rather than making the effort to form a personal opinion which helps to be more attentive to the world and what is going on. If people show this kind of behavior about this, what may seem to be such a trivial thing, imagine when it comes to truly important and far more complex subjects on which their life and freedom depends on. But I think little is to be expected. We cannot truly count on people's ability to have a critical thinking and good taste when there's such a great percentage of people that like Coldplay, which I'm sure many of you would agree that Coldplay, just as an example, isn't that good and that big of a deal, but why? That's the thing. Why is it not? And yet, why so many love and have such a great hype over a trivial thing? So many act as if it were the most excellent expression of art, but it's so stale. Don't just hear. Listen to what is being told. This is not so random a rant as it may seem at first glance. Be more attentive and mindful to what the world is throwing at you, especially this year. Now, with no more delay, let's get started, my dear friends, if you please. Right, Imbolc. Historically, it was a festival as part of 4 seasonal celebrations observed by Gaelic communities during the year. Of course, nowadays, through modern paganism, it is one of 8 seasonal festivals collectively called Wheel of the Year. We don't know much about the origins of this festival, aside from a few speculations based on its meaning and purpose, which opens up quite a lot of assumptions. It takes place on the 1st of February, and this festival marked the start of spring, which is why it involves quite a bit of, enthusiastic and hopeful essence to it, as it is a celebration to the very first signs of spring, a time of renewal. So there's often been this speculation of being a pagan celebration with its roots far back into the Neolithic, which does make sense, as we see the pattern in other yearly celebrations of following an agrarian animistic calendar. But I do have my doubts concerning how fixed in the calendar this celebration must have been, taking into consideration that the very first signs of spring can vary quite a lot, and it isn't that fixed from year to year, and also taking into consideration that the oldest calendars we find in Europe through archaeology were lunar calendars, which indicates that when there's the speculation of the origins or the roots of some pagan festivity, much isn't taken into account as to the dates, the time periods, and therefore the very meaning of such celebrations, because important celebrations such as these, their very existence was influenced by the human expression towards the habitat it lives in and how human communities behave towards the seasonal climate and time changes of the natural world, through which ancient human communities depended much more from. So, in a way, Imbolc, it does make sense having its origins based on an agrarian calendar, but it has been too quickly thrown a Neolithic origins to it, just to make the easy connection between agriculture and an ancient period, to give an ancient pagan origin to this festivity. Just because it is based on an agrarian calendar doesn't mean it is automatically from the Neolithic. Besides, throughout Europe, the factors and social and economic behaviors that determine a human community residing in the Neolithic period are a lot more complex, and the Neolithic was not a fixed period for all of Europe within the exact same time frame. And we must take into consideration that there are hundreds of similar celebrations to Imbolc all over Europe, with other names, of course, from different cultures, and celebrated in different moments of the year, different dates, and yet the basis of the celebrations are the same or quite similar. This also has to do with particular systems of rulership that have created such celebrations in different periods of their history to maintain the populations occupied and happy, which is why many celebrations deemed to be pagan actually had origins in the Christian Middle Ages, particularly in moments of history of great political and economic tension. Imbolc may have old origins indeed, but may not in fact be as ancient as many claim it to be. There are countless traditions that seem pagan in origins and are indeed based on agrarian calendars, but are neither ancient nor pagan, but many of which, not all, but many of which, as recent as the Middle Ages and even as recent as the modern period between the 16th and the 19th centuries. But one thing is certain, in the Northern Hemisphere, Imbolc is an important seasonal point as it marks the midpoint between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. Imbolc appears to have held indeed an important place in the Irish calendar from at least the 10th century, and that is as far as we have historical evidences for the celebration of this festivity with this name. And well, speaking of this name, Imbolc, right? The exact origins of it is uncertain, as it is its meaning. It has been suggested that it may derive from the Old Irish word for cleansing. This may indeed have a pagan origin as to the significance of fire within this celebration, as the purifying nature of fire was quite significant. The whole theme of the return of light upon the world and the thousands of celebrations and processions in which the element of fire plays an important role in chasing away the spirits of winter, but also the burning of the soils, not just before winter, but precisely during the first vestiges of warmer climate, right? At that moment, to make the fields ready for the regeneration of spring, and that in itself isn't pagan, but merely an agricultural tradition. But as I said, this association with cleansing is a suggestion. There are other suggestions, such as in the belly, as a nod to goats and sheep which were pregnant. And again, this isn't something exclusively pagan, but an economic reality for agrarian societies. But this meaning in particular is one of the most used nowadays, which people are quickly to jump to the conclusion that it is pagan in origin, as it is this connection of the return to fertility, to the life-giving powers of nature, to rebirth, just the same way animals are pregnant, so is the womb of the earth with the renewed powers of life which spring brings forth. I mean, without a doubt, it is a poetic idea, and there's no telling if indeed this was a sentiment shared by pagan belief systems in this time of the year. What is certain is that, once again, we are facing an agrarian economic and society from which these sort of celebrations sprout from, celebrations that go in line with the lifestyle and traditions associated to the means of survival of human communities. So Imbolc and this suggested association with pregnancy may very well be related to livestock and its controlled cycles of reproduction under an agrarian society that behaves towards securing means of sustenance throughout the year and towards the impact the seasonal cycles have upon the community of humans, and perhaps not so much to do with New Age pagan or neo-pagan romantic ideas of spring. To anyone who still depends on the knowledge of agrarian cycles or has at some point been inserted in agrarian communities knows that there's little space for romanticism, and that the practicalities of life and relying on the knowledge on how to behave to secure a means of sustenance under a life that depends so much on seasonal changes is the most important thing and a question of survival. To our ancestors under such a life and occupation, with far fewer practical and technological knowledge we have at our disposal nowadays, romantic views played little role in these celebrations. However, this doesn't take away the fact that behind such a celebration, there isn't a system of beliefs we like to point to be of pagan origins. We have to take into consideration that under an animistic agrarian system of beliefs, these celebrations are indeed important points that mark rituals within the human community in order to maintain the fundamental relationships between human community and everything else the human depends on for survival and continuation of the species that exists in nature and beyond human control. The very elements that provide the necessary conditions for the growth of means of sustenance the human community depends on. But I've talked about these rituals linked to pagan yearly celebrations in several other videos under the animistic agrarian system of beliefs. The point is, people jump to quite a lot of conclusions without measuring the complex historical, economic, and social factors that lead human communities to create moments of festivity in the first place. There's a particular figure that is quite important and marks its place in this celebration. Perhaps, and I think it's safe to say, the most important historical and social element and ritual within the celebration of Imbolc. I'm talking about Bridget, of course. Originally a pagan goddess and then a Christian saint, Bridget is an important, very important Imbolc figure. Although practices varied, the idea that Bridget announced the lighter days of spring, thus leading people from the dark half of the year, was central to her part in Imbolc traditions. She was deeply venerated, being invited into households as an honored guest, where she was variously feasted, entertained, and invited to sleep in a specially prepared bed. Households would leave objects in the hope Bridget would bless them when she visited or sleep in there on Imbolc Eve. We are here dealing with quite the animistic behavior. No doubt there would be a figure of Bridget brought into the households, and people would give shelter to this figure, as the very spirit of this entity would inhabit for a time the figure which was created precisely to house the spirit, and from this token of faith and belief, the spirit would act upon the community of humans. We see the exact same attitudes in Christian animism, particularly in Catholicism, which has always been far more animistic than other branches of the Christian religious expression. We see this still in some countries in Western Europe and some regions where the majority of the populations are Roman Catholic. And this was still quite common in many countries of Western Europe up until the 19th century and even in the 20th century. I'm not strange to this kind of behavior in Portugal. To have a space and even small beds for religious figures, some of which would not be permanently there, but precisely brought into the households in special moments of the year, so that the spirit of the entity that resides in the image or statuette made for that exact purpose could bring its blessings upon the human community or upon the family, the household. This not so far gone behavior in Catholic communities and families was also not uncommon in pagan systems of belief, particularly within agrarian animism precisely, and the construction of figures to house the spirits from which one requires blessings from. This, my friends, isn't exclusively pagan. This is animism in its most practical expression of religious conduct and behavior. And, of course, with the lack of imagery of the spirit from whom blessings were wanted, the symbology associated with such spirits also serves to invoke the very spirit and its powers and blessings. So, continuing with the subject, this is also noticeable with Bridget, as a goddess and as a saint, as rushes or reeds also played a big part in the Imbolc tradition. For instance, in Northern Ireland, they were carried as a symbolic gesture of Bridget circulating the household. Some were laid on the floor, even fashioned into crosses, or used to make a bed for Bridget as a saint to sleep in, right? Nowadays, Bridget is at the heart of modern pagan Imbolc celebrations, and for good reason. By the way, concerning Saint Bridget, her skull, her actual skull, is a religious relic and used to be brought back and forth from Ireland to Portugal, right? Until it remained, to this day, at Church of St. John the Baptist in Lisbon, Portugal. I have seen it, and perhaps someday I'll return to that church to show you. Just to finalize this, I think it is worth mentioning that Imbolc also has links to the Gaelic winter hag, the Cailleach. As tradition goes, it is at Imbolc that she collects wood for her fire to see her through to the end of winter. A sunny Imbolc enables her to collect more, and thus foretold a long winter. If the weather at Imbolc is bad, then winter will soon be over, as the Cailleach would not have enough firewood to last. Cailleach is an important figure which someday I would like to talk more about her. She's one of the suggestions for the historical name that gave origins to the very name of Portugal. Well, my dear friends, thank you so much for watching, and see you on the next video. And as always, thank you for today. Until we meet again, my dear friends.